For this current body of work, I've used as my inspiration Dante's Divine Comedy. And within the Divine Comedy, which he wrote in the 1300s, there were three parts. There was the Inferno, Purgatorio and Paradiso. As I went along, of course, I wouldn't be able to use a text randomly like that unless it didn't have some sort of meaning for me. And I soon discovered, after listening and reading to Dante's work, that what the Mount Purgatory held was a very good portrayal of the problem of extremes that we experience in our lives. And everyone along that mountain was dealing with the purging of their, one-sided way whilst they were living. So for me, having lived a fairly excessive life of extremes, I thought that it was a terrific analogy. The 7 deadly sins, of course, we generally sort of fly into judgment about and have a good look at ourselves and say, which one am I doing? Well, I think we've all been in amongst all of them at some time or another. And I think that I soon found that the idea was not to, in Dante's work, was not to fall necessarily into the sin itself, but to be aware of the opposite reaction to what might be named as the 7 deadly sins. So this is, of course, the extremes. When it comes down to the painting and what happens there, I didn't use such a structured approach as Dante. I sort of, I travelled all up and down the mountain at all times because I was discovering, and I tend to do it like that. And I've taken parts of the sins and looked into them a bit further, and then tried to overlay them into contemporary settings, perhaps, and and ideas that we may not make obvious connections to, like I've used in the case of Then the Animals All Went Home, where I've even used the idea of the Wall Street crash, the whole economic, financial, global crisis, to portray a scene of animals, bears and bulls in particular, running away from this robotic construction of man, which is has lost sight. For instance, Virgil's Vanguard is a painting where we've got this giant seagull perched on top of a group of people that seem to be modern day people. There's all sorts of bods and sods in there, and they're in a terrible state of panic, and you've got to wonder what's going on, because there's a very beautiful calm harbour, beautiful blue skies, and there's nothing terrible in the world going on at all, and yet this boat is filled with panic and tragedy and chaos, and it seems to be all rotated around the arrival of this big walloping seabird on top of them. I mean, the vanguard is really, the word for the coming, the herald. It's a heralding, the heralding of. So this is the context I was using it in, and it's really probably a sign for the humility that is approaching or needed for these people, where they're supposedly in control of their world, but by being in control of their world, they've actually become incredibly frightened because they've lost their faith in nature. And the big seagull is really a symbol for nature being larger than our perception. So the people sitting or scurrying around trying to get off the boat or falling are really about panic for no reason. The painting Can You Hear Anything was a bit of an evolution, actually. It came about through first of all composing or wanting to compose a picture of the city, but to keep from a painterly perspective, to try and keep the tones down and also to marry up everything, all the elements of energy in the work. And as I went through it and I came to the foreground, I had to bring in some sort of stage or play, and I had figures there and they were doing something, I can't even remember what they started out doing, but they ended up on the ground and listening, and it was as if that just evolved. The initial feeling around the painting was about the concern and care of someone who fell over in the city streets. But then suddenly I thought, no, it evolved into a man listening to the ground. Just remember something from when I was living in Vanuatu, where an old witch doctor guy, medicine man, he put lava stones on somebody's tummy to actually help them with a sickness, and then he listened to the stones, and they're just little elements that come back to you. And at the same time, this is how the process of a painting works. I was recalling times when I was in Europe, in some towns where there was just pavement everywhere and there was no dirt, and I felt incredibly suffocated. So can you hear anything is really asking, can you hear the soul of this place? And of course, all of the stage, the players, you know, the nun, the prostitute, the other characters that are walking in and around and coming up are really just like the stage of our lives, like the painting The Mask, which is very much, you know, we are walking on a stage in this great big performance. And once we get back into the audience of our own life and see how we can actually, you know, transform that stage play, you know, remarkable things happen. Psychologically, I don't think we've changed much over thousands of years. We're still very much human and we do very human things. But what I found that through my studies and meditations and own personal journey is that we've got a lot of very good cultural tools, cultural and spiritual tools. And the thing that just gets in our way of being able to actually use those is generally judgment, bias about, you know, being one religious denomination or another, or one preference to another. And if we can actually remove those biases, we can actually dig back in and gain access to some really terrific social guidelines and mentors, and utilise those on recreating a fairly sort of vigorous and contemporary approach to problems that, you know, seem to be modern problems.